The silver gleam of aluminum caught the first rays of dawn as the massive flying boat descended toward the churning Pacific. For 8 days, families had waited, hope fading with each sunset. Naval authorities had already drafted the telegrams declaring missing, presumed lost at sea. But Captain William Haley refused to accept what everyone else had come to believe, that the men of the USS Indianapolis were beyond saving. In the early morning of August 2, 1945, as his PBY Catalina flying boat approached the oil-slicked waters 280 miles north of Leyte Gulf, Haley spotted something impossible. Dozens of heads bobbing in the water, survivors clinging to life after nearly 9 days adrift in shark-infested waters. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's incredible to see our historical community spread across the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each subscription helps us continue unearthing these fascinating stories that shaped our world. Now let's get to the story. The PBY Catalina was never meant to be glamorous. With its ungainly silhouette and lumbering speed, it lacked the sleek appeal of the P-51 Mustang or the raw power of the B-17 Flying Fortress. Yet this peculiar aircraft, nicknamed the Cat, would become one of the most consequential planes of World War II and beyond. Born in the Depression-era Navy contracts of the 1930s, the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation's creation was designed with a singular mission: to extend the reach of American naval power across the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean. When the Catalina first rolled out of the factory in 1935, few could have predicted how this awkward-looking amphibious patrol bomber would eventually earn its reputation as the Angel of Mercy in countless rescue operations spanning decades of service. The development of the Catalina wasn't glamorous either. In 1933, as economic depression gripped America, the Navy issued a requirement for a new patrol flying boat. Consolidated Aircraft, founded by Reuben Fleet, had been struggling financially when they secured this critical contract. Chief Engineer Isaac Lattin faced the daunting challenge of creating an aircraft that could patrol for 24 hours, land on rough seas, and still carry enough armament for self-defense. The result was revolutionary: a high-wing monoplane with 2 engines mounted above the wing, providing extraordinary range while maintaining the ability to operate from water. The first XP-3Y-1 prototype took flight on March 28, 1935, and despite its unconventional appearance, it exceeded all performance expectations. By the time the first production models were delivered to the Navy in 1936, the aircraft had been rechristened the PBY. P for patrol, B for bomber, Y for Consolidated Aircraft's designation. When Pearl Harbor thrust America into World War II, only 103 PBYs were in service across the Pacific. Within months, production would accelerate dramatically, eventually reaching nearly 4,000 aircraft. The Catalina's baptism of fire came early in the war when a patrolling PBY spotted the Japanese carrier fleet approaching Midway Island in June 1942. This crucial sighting gave American forces the advance warning needed to mount a counterattack that would become one of the turning points of the Pacific War. But it was not these combat achievements that would define the Catalina's legacy. It was its extraordinary capacity for rescue and its unparalleled endurance that would write its name into history. The airframe itself seemed to defy conventional aeronautical wisdom. With a wingspan of 104 feet, yet a relatively small fuselage, the Catalina looked perpetually off balance. Its high-mounted wing supported 2 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 twin-Wasp radial engines, providing 1,200 horsepower each. This configuration gave the aircraft its impressive 2,500-mile range, but limited its top speed to just 175 mph. For pilots accustomed to nimble fighters, the PBY felt like flying a small building, slow to respond, methodical in its movements. But this steady, predictable handling made it ideal for long patrols and water landings. Commander John Shoemaker, who flew Catalinas in the Aleutian campaign, wrote in his 1943 logbook, "She'll never win a beauty contest or a race. But when you're 1,000 miles from home with failing light and rough seas below, there's no sweeter sight than the silhouette of the faithful cat." The crews who flew the Catalina developed an unusual relationship with their aircraft. Unlike the romantic attachment fighter pilots often had with their planes, Catalina crews spoke of their aircraft with the respectful familiarity one might reserve for a reliable but quirky old truck. They endured cramped conditions with 10 men typically sharing a space never designed for comfort during missions that often stretched beyond 15 hours. The aircraft lacked pressurization, heating was minimal, and noise from the engines made communication difficult. Yet, despite these hardships, the Catalina inspired fierce loyalty. Lieutenant James Dixon, after being rescued by a PBY near Guadalcanal in 1943, later requested transfer to a Catalina squadron, writing to his parents, "I owe my life to the ugliest, most beautiful aircraft ever built. If she'll have me, I'll fly her anywhere." The versatility of the Catalina revealed itself gradually as the war progressed. Beyond its intended patrol and anti-submarine roles, it found purpose as a transport, a bomber, and increasingly as the war's premier rescue aircraft. Its ability to land on water meant it could reach downed airmen and shipwreck survivors in locations no other aircraft could approach. The development of the Dumbo missions, named after Disney's flying elephant, formalized this rescue role. These operations involved Catalinas orbiting known combat areas, ready to land and retrieve pilots shot down during carrier operations or bombing runs over Japanese territory. By war's end, thousands of aviators and sailors owed their lives to these missions. One of the most dramatic demonstrations of the Catalina's rescue capabilities came after the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. As American carrier aircraft pursued retreating Japanese forces beyond their normal operational range, dozens of planes ran out of fuel on the return journey. Admiral Mark Mitcher made the difficult decision to illuminate his fleet, risking enemy detection, to guide his pilots home. Despite this, many aircraft ditched in the open ocean. Through the night and into the next day, Catalinas plucked 215 aviators from the water in what became known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Ensign George Gay, rescued by one such mission, later recalled, "When that big flying boat touched down near me, throwing spray in all directions, it might as well have been heaven descending to earth." The Catalina's finest hour, however, came in perhaps the Navy's darkest moment, the aftermath of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. The heavy cruiser had just delivered components of the atomic bomb to Tinian when it was struck by Japanese torpedoes shortly after midnight on July 30, 1945. The ship sank in just 12 minutes, with roughly 900 of its 196 crew initially surviving the sinking. Due to a series of communication errors and administrative oversights, the ship's absence went unnoticed for days. No distress call had been received, and the vessel wasn't expected at its destination for several more days. The survivors drifted in shark-infested waters, suffering from exposure, dehydration, and relentless shark attacks, with their numbers dwindling hourly. It was Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, piloting a PBY Catalina on routine patrol, who spotted the oil slick on August 2nd. Initially thinking he had found a Japanese submarine, he descended for a closer look and was shocked to discover men floating in life jackets. His radioed report triggered one of the largest rescue operations of the war. Lieutenant Adrian Marks, flying another Catalina, made the extraordinary decision to land his aircraft in the open ocean despite dangerous swells, a maneuver for which the PBY was capable, but which remained extremely hazardous. The official flight manual specifically advised against open-sea landings except in emergencies, noting the PBY-5A is designed for protected water operations. Open-sea landings should be attempted only in cases of extreme emergency. This was precisely such an emergency. Marks later recalled the moment of decision. "We could see sharks attacking men. I knew that if I landed, I might not be able to take off again, but that seemed unimportant compared to what was happening in the water." His Catalina skipped across wave tops, finally settling into the rough seas with damaged floats. Over the next hours, Marks and his crew pulled 56 survivors from the water into the aircraft, far beyond its designed capacity. Men were crowded into every available space, with some even lashed to the wings with parachute cord. The overloaded aircraft could not take off again, but it provided shelter until surface vessels arrived. By the operation's end, 316 men from the Indianapolis would survive, many owing their lives directly to the Catalina crews, who found them and either rescued them directly or marked their position for other rescue vessels. The end of World War II did not mark the end of the Catalina's service. As militaries worldwide downsized, many PBYs found new life in civilian roles. Their long-range and amphibious capabilities made them ideal for a variety of specialized tasks. Airlines like Qantas used them for passenger service to remote Pacific islands. In South America, they opened routes into the Amazon interior. Fire departments in California and Canada converted them into water bombers for fighting forest fires, their capacious hulls repurposed to carry 7,100 pounds of water that could be dropped precisely on advancing flames. When a massive wildfire threatened Yellowstone National Park in 1988, veteran Catalinas, by then more than 40 years old, flew alongside modern aircraft in the firefighting effort. Perhaps the most romantic post-war chapter in the Catalina story came through exploration. The same qualities that made it an excellent patrol aircraft, range, reliability, and amphibious capability, made it perfect for reaching remote locations. Swedish filmmaker and explorer Arne Suxdorf used a Catalina to capture the first aerial footage of uncontacted indigenous tribes in the Amazon basin in the early 1950s. The American millionaire and explorer Thomas Kendall purchased a surplus PBY in 1956 to search for pirate treasure in the Caribbean, eventually mapping dozens of previously uncharted small islands and coral formations. His aircraft, painted bright red and nicknamed the Flying Archaeologist, became a familiar sight throughout the region until his disappearance during a storm in 1963. The geological survey work conducted by Catalinas in the 1950s directly contributed to our understanding of plate tectonics and climate science. Dr. Helena Wright of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution used a modified PBY-6A to conduct the first comprehensive aerial magnetic survey of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, gathering data that would help confirm the theory of seafloor spreading. The aircraft's ability to operate from remote locations with minimal support infrastructure made possible research that would have been prohibitively expensive using ships alone. The Catalina democratized oceanography, Wright later wrote. "We could accomplish in weeks what would have taken months with vessel-based operations and reach places ships simply couldn't access safely." By the 1960s, most Catalinas had been retired from military service, replaced by purpose-built search and rescue aircraft like the Grumman Albatross and later helicopters. The last military PBY flight in U.S. service occurred in 1964, when the Coast Guard retired its final example after 29 years of continuous operation. Yet around the world, especially in developing nations with extensive coastlines or inland waterways, the Catalina soldiered on. The Brazilian Air Force maintained a squadron until 1982, using them to patrol the Amazon basin and to provide medical services to isolated communities. French naval forces in Polynesia kept several aircraft operational into the 1970s for long-range maritime patrol around their far-flung Pacific territories. Throughout these decades, the Catalina continued to prove its worth in crisis after crisis. When the passenger liner SS Andrea Doria sank after colliding with the MS Stockholm off Nantucket in 1956, Catalinas from the Coast Guard were among the first aircraft on scene, coordinating the rescue effort that saved 1,660 lives. During catastrophic flooding in the Netherlands in 1953, PBYs from multiple European air forces delivered supplies to isolated communities and evacuated stranded civilians. A Chilean Navy Catalina conducted what remains one of the longest medical evacuations in aviation history in 1969, flying 2,300 miles from Antarctica with an injured researcher, landing on the ocean near Punta Arenas when weather prevented airfield use. The aging of these remarkable aircraft presented increasing challenges as the decades passed. Spare parts became scarce, and the specialized knowledge required to maintain the complex systems gradually disappeared as mechanics retired. Each remaining airframe became more valuable, not just as a functional aircraft, but as a repository of history. The distinctive sound of the twin Wasp engines, a deep, resonant drone, unlike the higher pitch of more modern radials, grew increasingly rare in the skies. Aviation enthusiasts would travel hundreds of miles when word spread that a flying Catalina would make an appearance at an air show. The transition from operational necessity to historical artifact was gradual. In 1979, the Commemorative Air Force acquired a PBY-6A and began the painstaking process of restoring it to wartime configuration. This aircraft, named Black Cat, in honor of the night operating squadrons of the Pacific War, became one of the most visible ambassadors for Catalina history, appearing at dozens of air shows annually. Each restoration project faced the same fundamental challenge. These aircraft were never designed to last 80 years. Corrosion, especially in the complex hull structures designed for water operations, presented persistent problems. The specialized skills required for restoration became an oral tradition passed between generations of dedicated volunteers. By the 1990s, fewer than 20 airworthy Catalinas remained worldwide, each representing an extraordinary investment of resources and dedication. The aircraft that had once been mass-produced at a rate of 5 per day had become museum pieces, their continued operation a minor miracle of preservation. Yet despite their rarity, the Catalinas refused to become merely static displays. In 1993, a coalition of PBY operators and historians organized Operation Catflight, bringing together 7 flying examples from 4 countries in a formation over San Diego Bay, the largest gathering of airworthy Catalinas since the 1950s. The event drew over 150,000 spectators, many of them veterans who had served aboard the aircraft during their military careers. One particularly poignant chapter in the Catalina's twilight years came in 1998, when the Hemisphere Dancer, a PBY owned by musician Jimmy Buffett, and used for island hopping throughout the Caribbean, was mistakenly fired upon by Jamaican police who suspected it of drug smuggling. Buffett, who was aboard with U2's Bono and their families, incorporated the experience into his song Jamaica Mistaka. The incident highlighted both the ongoing utility of these aging aircraft for remote area travel and the increasing rarity of their distinctive silhouette in modern skies. The aircraft survived the shooting and continued flying for several more years before being retired to the Margaritaville Cafe in Orlando, Florida. Perhaps the only combat-damaged Catalina on display in a restaurant. The 21st century brought new challenges and opportunities for Catalina preservation. Digital technology enabled the precise documentation of original specifications and the creation of new parts when originals couldn't be found. International networks of enthusiasts shared knowledge across continents, pooling resources to keep the remaining aircraft flying. In Australia, the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society completed an 11-year project in 2016 to return a PBY-6A to airworthiness, incorporating parts from 4 other aircraft and more than 80,000 volunteer hours. The first post-restoration flight attracted a crowd of 5,000, including descendants of Catalina crews who had operated from the same airfield during the war. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Catalina story is how frequently these aging aircraft have continued to write new chapters in their operational history, In 2012, when wildfires threatened remote communities in British Columbia, Canada's Buffalo Airways brought their 67-year-old PBY-5A water bomber out of semi-retirement for one last operational deployment. Despite newer purpose-built aircraft being available, the Catalina's unique ability to scoop water from small lakes while maintaining good low-speed handling characteristics made it invaluable for protecting properties in difficult terrain. Chief Pilot Arnie Schrader, then 72 years old and himself a veteran of 40 years of Catalina operations, remarked after the final flight, "She's not the fastest or the prettiest, but when you need an aircraft that can work this close to the trees and still get the job done safely, there's still nothing better." For the families of those rescued by Catalinas over decades of service, the aircraft transcends its mechanical specifications to become something approaching mythical. At a 2018 reunion of USS Indianapolis survivors and their families, 93-year-old Adolfo Celaya embraced the restored PBY-5A sentimental journey that had been flown in for the occasion. Though not the actual aircraft that had spotted the Indianapolis survivors, it represented the type that had saved his life 73 years earlier. "I've seen angels," he told attendees, "and they have wings made of aluminum." His grandson, recording the moment, captured not just a veteran's emotional connection to a historic aircraft, but the human meaning behind the Catalina's enduring nickname, Angel of Mercy. The technical legacy of the Catalina extends far beyond the aircraft itself. Its innovative hull design influenced generations of flying boats and seaplanes that followed. The material science developed to combat corrosion in its complex water contact surfaces informed maritime aircraft construction for decades. Even its control systems, which incorporated early hydraulic assistance to manage the aerodynamic forces on its large control surfaces, anticipated technologies that would become standard in later aircraft. When engineer Igor Sikorsky developed the S-42 flying boat for Pan American Airways' transoceanic routes, he explicitly credited the Catalina's hull design as an influence, noting that Consolidated's solution to the spray problem was nothing short of revolutionary. What made the Catalina's hull design so exceptional was its hybrid nature, neither a pure flying boat nor a conventional landplane with floats. The aircraft's deep V hull provided stability on rough water, while sponsons mounted on either side of the fuselage provided lateral stability when at rest. These sponsons, essentially wing-like structures extending from the lower hull, doubled as mounting points for defensive armament and created additional buoyancy. They solved a problem that had plagued earlier flying boat designs: the tendency for a high wing to cause the aircraft to tip over in strong winds when resting on water. As naval historian Robert Cressman noted in his study of Pacific aerial operations, the PBY's ability to remain stable in sea states that would have capsized earlier patrol aircraft directly contributed to its reputation for reliability among crews. The materials used in the Catalina's construction reflected a transitional period in aviation manufacturing. The airframe combined aluminum structures with fabric-covered control surfaces, a hybrid approach that balanced weight concerns with the manufacturing limitations of the era. As production accelerated during wartime, Consolidated introduced an increasing number of aluminum components, culminating in the PBY-6A with its all-metal rudder and ailerons. This evolution paralleled the broader shift in aircraft construction techniques during the 1940s. Yet this mixed material approach created unique maintenance challenges. Crew Chief Michael Donahue, who maintained Catalinas in the Aleutians, recorded in his technical diary, "Water finds its way everywhere in these birds. The junction between fabric and metal becomes a corrosion hotspot after every water landing." We're constantly battling salt damage at stress points, especially around the hull step and sponson attachments. The Catalina's wartime record goes beyond its well-documented rescue operations. Between 1941 and 1945, PBYs are credited with sinking 40 enemy submarines, a testament to their effectiveness as patrol bombers despite their modest speed. The aircraft's long endurance proved decisive in anti-submarine warfare, allowing it to maintain contact with submarines forced to surface at night to recharge batteries. On May 26, 1943, a PBY from VP-84 made history by becoming the first aircraft to use the newly developed magnetic anomaly detection (MAD) equipment to locate and attack a submerged submarine, sinking U-640 in the mid-Atlantic. The integration of this technology, which detected disturbances in Earth's magnetic field caused by a submarine's metal hull, transformed maritime patrol operations. Captain Benjamin Farnsworth, who commanded Pacific Fleet patrol squadrons in 1944-45, later wrote, "The Catalina proved uniquely suited to early MAD operations. Its stability and endurance allowed for the precise, low-altitude flight paths needed for effective magnetic detection. Faster aircraft simply couldn't maintain the necessary flight profile for sufficient time." Among the Catalina crews, a unique operational culture developed, distinct from both the fighter and bomber communities. PBY operations required extended periods of isolation, intense concentration during long overwater flights, and the ability to transition rapidly from routine patrol to high-stress combat or rescue scenarios. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Pollock, who commanded a Black Cat squadron in the Solomon Islands campaign, described this culture in his unpublished memoir. "Our men lived between worlds, neither the glamorous fighter jocks nor the regimented heavy bomber crews. We operated largely independently, making life-or-death decisions hundreds of miles from any authority. This bred a peculiar mix of casual protocol with obsessive attention to aircraft maintenance and navigation. A sloppy approach to either would mean death not just for us, but for those we were tasked to find and save." This independence of operation led to numerous Catalina innovations born of necessity. Crews in the Pacific Theater modified their aircraft extensively, often without official authorization. The most famous adaptation was the installation of provisional bunks along the internal walls of the fuselage, allowing crew members to rest during long missions. This unofficial modification became so successful that it was eventually incorporated into factory specifications. Other field modifications included additional armor plating under crew positions, supplementary radio equipment for coordinating with surface vessels, and enlarged observation windows. Lieutenant Walter Hahn, a PBY pilot in the Solomon Islands, noted in correspondence, "Every cat in our squadron is different. Each reflects the particular missions it flies and the quirks of its crew. Mine has extra plexiglass panels we salvaged from a wrecked B-25 to improve downward visibility, and we've installed a coffee pot that runs off the electrical system. Not standard issue, but essential for sanity during 15-hour patrols." The PBY's role in intelligence operations remains partially classified even decades later. The aircraft's range and amphibious capabilities made it ideal for clandestine missions behind enemy lines. In the Pacific, Catalinas operated by the Allied Intelligence Bureau transported agents to occupied territories throughout the Japanese-held islands. These missions typically occurred during moonless nights with aircraft painted matte black to reduce visibility. The PBY would land in remote lagoons or sheltered bays, drop off agents or supplies, and collect intelligence reports from operatives in the field. Similar operations occurred in Europe, where Catalinas based in Britain transported resistance members and espionage equipment to and from occupied Norway and Denmark. Danish resistance member Erik Nissen, in a 1995 interview, recalled, "The arrival of a Catalina meant life, both literally for those escaping the Gestapo and figuratively for our network starved of supplies and communication. We would hear the engines far off, then see the black shape settling on the water in darkness. 20 minutes later it would be gone, leaving us with radio parts, weapons, medicine, and sometimes new colleagues." The Catalina's famous Black Cat squadrons represented one of naval aviation's most successful adaptations to specialized warfare. Beginning in 1943, select PBY squadrons were dedicated to night operations against Japanese shipping. Their aircraft were painted matte black to reduce visibility, and crews underwent specialized training in night navigation and attack techniques. Operating from forward bases in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, these squadrons conducted harassment raids that had a psychological impact far beyond their physical destruction. Japanese convoy reports from 1943-44 consistently mention the fear induced by Black Cat operations. The uncertainty of when and where attacks might come forced ships to run without lights and disrupted rest cycles for crews. Admiral Nimitz specifically commended the Black Cats in his Pacific Command Summary of August 1943, noting, "The psychological effect of these night attacks on enemy logistics has proven as valuable as their tangible results." Japanese convoy schedules are increasingly disrupted by the mere possibility of PBY interdiction. The post-war transition of the Catalina to civilian operations revealed both the versatility of the design and the abundance of surplus military aircraft. In 1946, hundreds of PBYs were declared surplus by the U.S. Navy and offered for sale at prices often below $10,000, a fraction of their original manufacturing cost. This created a unique market dynamic where small airlines, resource companies, and even wealthy individuals could acquire aircraft with extraordinary capabilities at bargain prices. The Canadian company, Maritime Central Airways, purchased 13 Catalinas for $8,000 each in 1946 to establish service to remote Labrador mining operations. Company President Carl Burke later recalled, "For the price of a modest house, we acquired aircraft that could reach any point in our territory, regardless of runway availability." The Catalina's economics made possible air service to communities that could never have supported conventional operations. The transition to firefighting operations represented one of the most successful adaptations of military aircraft to civilian purposes. Beginning in the late 1940s, Catalinas were converted to carry water or fire retardant, creating the first generation of purpose-built aerial firefighting aircraft. The conversion process typically involved removing military equipment and installing a large water tank in the former bomb bay with hydraulically operated doors for controlled release. Canadian company flying tankers operated the largest fleet, with 10 Catalinas protecting the valuable timber resources of British Columbia. Their chief pilot, Dan McIver, pioneered the challenging technique of scooping water from lakes while skimming the surface at 70 knots, a maneuver requiring exceptional piloting skill that became standard practice in aerial firefighting. His innovation allowed a single aircraft to deliver multiple water loads without returning to base, dramatically increasing efficiency in remote fire suppression. The exploration role of post-war Catalinas extended beyond scientific research to humanitarian and medical missions. Missionary aviation organizations acquired surplus PBYs to reach isolated populations throughout Oceania, the Amazon basin, and Central Africa. The Summer Institute of Linguistics operated 3 Catalinas in Peru and Ecuador during the 1950s, providing the only regular contact between remote linguistic research stations and the outside world. In Australia, the Royal Flying Doctors Service incorporated 2 PBY-5As into their fleet for servicing the Northern Territory. The aircraft's range allowed direct flights from Darwin to isolated cattle stations that previously required multiple stops. Dr. Margaret Fletcher, who flew as a medical officer on these flights, wrote in her 1957 journal, "The Catalina has transformed our practice. Where once we might take 2 days to reach a critical patient, we now arrive in hours. The aircraft's ability to land on billabongs and rivers means we can reach people who previously had to be brought to us, often too late." The cultural impact of the Catalina extended into popular media, where the aircraft became shorthand for far-flung adventure and rescue. In film, the 1959 adventure drama Mission Over Korea featured a climactic PBY rescue sequence that influenced a generation's perception of the aircraft. Author Ernest Gann, himself a former transport pilot, featured a Catalina prominently in his 1944 novel Island in the Sky, drawing on his own experiences flying in remote northern regions. The aircraft even found its way into children's literature. The 1965 picture book, Sam and the Firefly Rescue, featured a firefighting Catalina as a central character. Through these cultural representations, the Catalina maintained a presence in public imagination, even as the actual aircraft became increasingly rare in operational use. The transition to museum preservation began in earnest during the 1970s, as the last operational examples retired from government service worldwide. This shift from operational asset to historical artifact presented unique challenges. Unlike fighters or bombers that could be displayed in conventional museums, the Catalina's size and amphibious nature complicated preservation efforts. The National Air and Space Museum acquired a PBY-5A in 1979, but struggled with exhibition space for the massive aircraft, eventually placing it in off-site storage where it remained for decades. More successful were dedicated flying boat museums like the Pima Air and Space Museum and the Naval Aviation Museum, which could accommodate the aircraft's 104-foot wingspan and provide context for its amphibious capabilities. Restoration specialist James Morrison, who worked on 4 different Catalina preservation projects, observed in a 1992 interview, "The PBY presents unique preservation challenges because it was designed for 2 environments, air and water. The corrosion protection systems have usually deteriorated, meaning we're often rebuilding hull structures from scratch. It's the most difficult aircraft I've worked with, but also the most rewarding when completed." The international dimension of Catalina preservation reflects the aircraft's global service history. Significant restoration projects have occurred in Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand, each focusing on aircraft with particular historical significance to their nations. The Royal Netherlands Navy maintained their last operational PBY until 1982, then transferred it directly to the Dutch Aviation Museum for preservation. In the UK, the Catalina restoration at Imperial War Museum Duxford incorporated components from 5 different aircraft to create a composite representing the air-sea rescue units that saved hundreds of downed airmen in the North Sea. The project's lead engineer, Richard Payne, explained, "Each part tells its own story. Our wing spars came from a Canadian forestry aircraft, while the hulls served with the Portuguese Navy until 1977. Together, they represent not just one aircraft, but the remarkable adaptability and longevity of the design." The technological preservation challenge extends beyond the physical aircraft to the operational knowledge required to fly and maintain them. As the generation of pilots with wartime PBY experience aged, a critical gap emerged in the transmission of flying boat operational techniques. The Catalina Society, formed in 1990, established a formal apprenticeship program pairing experienced PBY pilots with younger aviators to preserve these specialized skills. Captain Paul Warren, who flew Catalinas with the Royal Australian Air Force until 1968, served as the program's first instructor. Flying a Catalina safely requires techniques you won't learn in any contemporary flight training, he explained in a 2000 interview. Water operations especially involve sensory inputs, the feel of the hull on the water surface, the sound of spray hitting the sponsons, that can't be adequately described in manuals. This knowledge must be transferred person to person, just as it was taught to me in 1952. The ecological legacy of the Catalina emerged as an unexpected dimension of its historical impact. The aircraft's use in early conservation biology, particularly in wildlife surveys of remote regions, provided baseline data that would later prove invaluable to environmental scientists. From 1947 to 1954, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service operated 2 PBY-5As to conduct the first comprehensive surveys of migratory bird populations across the Arctic. These surveys established monitoring protocols and population estimates that continue to inform modern conservation efforts. Dr. Walter Breckenridge, who participated in these expeditions, noted in his field journals, "The Catalina's ability to access remote lakes and coastal areas opened biological frontiers previously impossible to survey systematically." We documented waterfowl breeding grounds that were entirely unknown to science, establishing population baselines against which all future changes would be measured. The restoration of Catalinas to flying condition accelerated in the 1990s as warbird enthusiasm grew and aviation preservation techniques improved. Unlike many historic aircraft that remain grounded, approximately 15 Catalinas have been returned to flight worldwide since 1980, an extraordinary achievement given their complexity. The process typically requires between 40,000 and 100,000 labor hours and represents one of the most challenging aircraft restoration projects possible. The specialized nature of flying boat components means that virtually every major restoration has required manufacturing new parts from scratch, often without complete drawings or specifications. Metallurgist David Perkins, who participated in 3 PBY restoration projects, explained, "We've had to reverse engineer components like the complex water rudder assemblies and hull step structures. The original aluminum alloys aren't always available, so we've developed modern equivalents that maintain the same strength characteristics while incorporating corrosion resistance that wasn't available in the 1940s. The economic challenges of maintaining flying Catalinas have led to innovative operational models. Unlike smaller warbirds that can operate economically with minimal crew and infrastructure, the PBY requires substantial resources for both flight operations and maintenance. The Catalina Aircraft Trust, established in 2005, pioneered a cooperative ownership structure where multiple museums and heritage organizations share operational costs and access to a single flying example. This model has since been adopted by several other PBY operators, allowing the aircraft to appear at events across multiple countries while distributing the estimated $5,000 per flight hour operating costs among several organizations. Heritage flight operator Michael Chapman observed, "No single museum could justify the operational costs of a Catalina today. By sharing the aircraft among 6 participating organizations across 3 countries, we've created a sustainable model where each partner hosts the aircraft for 2 months annually, covering maintenance during their period of operation." For the veterans who flew and maintained these aircraft, the sound of Catalina engines stirs memories that span decades and continents. At the 2015 Flying Legends Air Show in Duxford, England, 97-year-old former flight engineer Robert Livingston heard a PBY's twin Wasp engines start up for the first time in 70 years. Witnesses described how his expression transformed as the distinctive rumble reached him. "That's my girl," he said quietly. "She always shook just a little at 800 RPM during warm-up." Such moments of connection between the human and mechanical histories of the Catalina continue to occur at air shows and commemorations worldwide, providing powerful reminders of the aircraft's enduring human significance beyond its technical specifications or combat record. The cultural geography of Catalina operations created lasting connections between communities separated by vast distances. From the Aleutian outposts, where PBYs maintained the only reliable link to mainland Alaska, to the remote Pacific Islands where the arrival of a Catalina meant mail and supplies, the aircraft created a network of human connections across previously unbridgeable distances. Anthropologist Susan Marsden, studying these celebrations in 1998, noted, "These events transcend mere aircraft enthusiasm to become expressions of cultural identity, a recognition that these communities exist in their modern form because the Catalina made their continued habitation possible during critical decades of transition." Today, as the last flying examples of the PBY Catalina approach their 9th decade, each flight represents an increasingly precious connection to aviation history. In Alaska, several coastal communities still hold annual Catalina Day celebrations commemorating the aircraft that provided their only contact with the outside world during winter months from the 1930s through the 1960s. When the deep rumble of twin Wasp engines passes overhead, it offers a direct sensory link to a time when these ungainly yet magnificent aircraft plied the world's oceans on missions of patrol, combat, and rescue. The Catalina's story encompasses much of 20th century history, from its Depression-era development through global war, Cold War tensions, and into the modern era of historical preservation. Each remaining airframe carries not just its own provenance, but the accumulated weight of countless missions flown and lives touched. For Captain William Haley, whose Catalina flight began our story with the miraculous discovery of Indianapolis survivors, the aircraft represented something beyond its aluminum, fabric, and steel construction. In his official report, filed after returning to base with the first survivors, he wrote words that perhaps best capture the Catalina's enduring significance. When all other options had been exhausted, when conventional wisdom suggested hope was lost, the PBY offered one last possibility, the chance to search beyond the expected search area, to land where no runway existed, to bridge the gap between certain loss and possible salvation. In its ungainly profile lies its greatest beauty, the promise that even when one is truly lost, something might still be coming to find you.